Welcome to a special edition of News Long Beach, Reimagining Diversity in Long Beach. I'm your host, Andrea Sulsona, publisher and editor of Palacio de Long Beach, the only bilingual magazine in the city. Long Beach is known as one of the most, if not the most, diverse city in America. For the next hour, News Long Beach is going to explore exactly what that means, from demographics to social and economic issues to a peek into the city's future. First, we start with these statistics. In 2000, whites were 33% of the population. In 2012, that number dropped to 28%. Latinos, on the other hand, saw a 6% jump in population during that same period. 23% of Long Beach residents live in poverty, but in the African American community, that number is 30%. And lastly, graduation rates for African American students and Latino students in the Long Beach Unified School District are below the average. Now, these are not just numbers. These represent real people and their realities. To help us understand these and other numbers are our guests. First, Doctors William Crampton and Alex Norman, both co-directors of Rethinking Greater Long Beach, a community think tank, and Dr. Juan Benitez, Executive Director of the Cal State University Long Beach Center for Community Engagement. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Let's begin this discussion with the numbers that we just saw on screen. What's your reaction to them?
Well, I think two main points. One is that although Long Beach has always prided itself and ourselves in the diversity, we have to be very cognizant that there are differences. We can't just lump all ethnic and racial groups together. So even though a majority of Long Beach is non-white, there are many differences both between groups, but also amongst each group. So for instance, the Cambodian population here in Long Beach has its own unique cultural and ethnic and racial history compared with that of African Americans, Latinos, and other groups. So although there's a lot of richness in our diversity, and there are many examples of ways that we celebrate that, we also have to be very cognizant of the policy implications of having these groups and the trends that we see amongst these groups.
Wonderful.
You
Doctor?
also have to look at it in terms of geographic of the city. There's a very wide diversity as you go from one area of the city to the other, such as in the North Long Beach area and the West Long Beach area, less than 10% of the population is white, while in the shoreline area and on the east side, almost 70% of the population is white. So some areas you have very high minority populations, other areas very high white populations.
Thank you.
The important thing, though, is that what are the policy and decision makers going to do with these data? I mean, these are not new data. Since, 13 years ago, when we began rethinking Greater Long Beach as an idea, the poverty rate was 19%. So that rate hasn't really changed. So what that means is that these numbers have just been floating around, and decision makers have not really responded with policies that made an impact on these numbers. So if you project that into the future, then it means that those people who are poor are more than likely to be poor, unemployed, uneducated, and if they do get a job, they'll be the first laid off and the last to be called back.
Thank you. Juan, what do you think some of the implications of this significant number of Long Beach youth growing up in poverty?
Well, I think Alex already alluded to it. I think the policy implications here is that we can't come up with one size fits all either policies and or programs and services by that same logic. I think what we want to avoid is a one size fits all solution to implications that may not be the exact same for all groups that policies are impacting. So for instance, if we're going to serve a particular group in Long Beach, we have to look, as Bill suggested, at the geographic area that's going to be served. If we're going to look at particular schools in the school district, again, we have to look at geography, we have to look at the composition of the specific school. And I think more importantly, that we be strategic in targeted programs and services versus kind of a universal approach to policy that doesn't take into account the differences and unique circumstances for each group. And I'm concerned that historically we haven't approached policies with that in mind. So I'd rather see us go from serving the community by demographic coincidence to more focused and strategic approaches.
Right. So we saw the graduation rates for Latinos and African Americans. How do you see education playing a role as a solution to that poverty rate here in Long Beach?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
the only solution. If you look at the statistics for Long Beach, if somebody doesn't have a high school degree, there's a 40% probability they're going to be living in poverty. If they have a college degree, there's a 5% probability they're going to live in poverty. Can look at the same thing with unemployment and the other ones. Education's a solution. Yes, the graduation rate is lower. Also, if we add into it the graduation rate for those who have completed the requirements to go to the California State University system or UC system, it becomes much lower, where it's less than 20% of the African Americans and African American students even have the right to apply to these schools. So education to me is and research all over the country is showing education is the primary route for long-term getting out of the poverty cycle.
And of course, what that means then is the policies that are developed have to be targeted to recruit, retain, and graduate students who meet, first of all, the UC and Cal State University requirements. Right. And if they don't meet those requirements, they have an alternative or a career or a trade. And this is happening at the same time that with Long Beach Community College is eliminating certain trade and career courses. And yet the demand is high. So it doesn't really, the policy doesn't really meet the problem. And I think what has to happen is that policymakers and decision makers are going to have to really look at the problem and then develop the policies. And in Long Beach right now, the policies seem to be skewed to downtown development.
Do you agree with that?
And that's magnified, I completely agree, that's magnified by the fact that when we look at the conditions that perpetuate the data that's been shared, it's decision makers at many levels end up pointing the problem at the communities themselves rather than at institutional, systematic, and policy that perpetuate this.
So when you talk about decision makers, how does leadership development, both political and community leaders, how does that play a role in the solution?
I think it's directly connected. We have a vacuum in emerging leadership that can actually function as decision makers and policy makers. And that's directly connected to education. When a majority of your population is not achieving the same A through G completion rates, by default, you're not going to have access to the same educational systems and institutions as those that are achieving at higher rates. So not only is that around achievement, it's around opportunity as well. So it's really easy to say, Latinos don't prioritize education, African Americans don't prioritize education, without taking into account what are the structural, systematic factors that create these conditions in the first place.
Right.
It's not a condition that some students are performing at much higher levels than other students, and those other students tend to be African American and Latinos in Long Beach.
And I don't know whether it's by design, but certainly it's the byproduct of focus on developing downtown means that the neighborhoods suffer. So what you have is a downtown-centered policy, and the development of the downtown doesn't include benefits for the community. So for example, if there is to be relocation of individuals from downtown, there is no consideration for even awarding a stipend so that those who don't have right of refusal for the housing downtown can relocate somewhere else. it's like a no deposit, no return
Right.
attitude.
Right.
And I think what that means is that in the long run, as Juan says, we have to develop the kind of leadership that has the community's heart at its welfare, and those are the people that we need to elect and put into office.
So as the demographic, thank you, as the demographic landscape continues to change, how do you see that affecting the future of Long Beach?
If we don't make major changes in the community, the leadership, education, those systems, what we're going to see is a continuation. If you look at the trends since 2000, right now at the school level, we're going to have 41% of the population is Latino. At the school level, 54%, and as I understand this year, it's now 55% of the student body is Latino. It's going to be primary Latino, primary poverty, and we're going to continue the cycle on into the future.
I think what I would be looking at if I were a policy decision maker is what's the tipping point at which those who are not productive and contributing to the public coffers, at what point do they begin to have such a drain on the city funds that the city can't cope, and we end up like Detroit? Now that's a possibility, because if we don't educate our young people, if they're not able to get good jobs, they're going to be unemployed. They're going to be dependent upon an ever dwindling public fund,
Right.
which means that either we go bankrupt or we develop these young people as resources. So in a sense, it really means whether or not the people in decision-making positions are willing to put the same resources in for these new immigrants that they did for the people who came from Iowa.
I think another thing that impacts what Alex just mentioned is, well, who and what is informing and shaping decision making and the decision makers. If there's a disconnect between decision makers and the communities that they're serving, then again, we're operating in a vacuum here in terms of what's shaping and informing decision makers. By the same token, we talk about community engagement, about parent engagement in schools, but if there's not a vested, systematic way to engage and involve community members, not just to do outreach to them, but for them to feel vested in decision making, in policy making, then again, we tend to perpetuate our errors in the past that way.
Right. And it's no secret that a lot of people that can vote don't vote. How do you feel about that, and how can we encourage people to go to the polls and take their role more seriously and take advantage of their voice?
Well, voting is absolutely necessary and important, but voting in and of itself is not enough, is not sufficient. And for those that either can't vote, you know, we have a young population. There are many other ways to influence and shape policy making. You don't need to necessarily be able to vote to go to a school site council meeting or a city council meeting. There are many other ways to be involved. Again, voting is absolutely necessary and essential,
Sure.
but for a large percent of our population, either by age or by eligibility, they aren't unable to vote, but there are many other ways to become involved. And that's what I meant by systematically creating avenues for folks to feel that they are vested, and that's through community engagement.
You know, ICO, the Interfaith Community Organization, has done an analysis of voting patterns in Long Beach by zip code, and has looked at the different ethnicities in terms of who votes. And basically, when you look at our districts, the 3rd district and the 5th district elect the mayor. And that's because the 3rd district and the 5th district are likely to have 50, 60% of the registered voters who vote. But when you look at the preponderance of voters and people who are registered to vote, the larger numbers are in the other districts. But because those districts will vote 16, 19, 25%, what happens is that the 2 districts, the 3rd and the 5th, end up selecting the mayor. So one of the strategies could be to show people why their vote can count, and then encourage them to vote. many people feel that their vote simply doesn't count. And there's adequate reason for them to feel that way, given the way some of our city elected leaders have made decisions.
Dr. Crampton?
I basically agree with both they say. I think voter turnout requires good voter education to let the people really know their vote counts. Too many don't. In our system, having it on a work day, although quote-unquote companies are supposed to give people time off to vote, it makes it much more difficult as opposed to some other countries that have it on weekends. And likewise, we could always go, which I like the Australian system, it's illegal not to vote. Don't show up the polls,
That'd
you get
be
a
nice.
ticket.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we need to make it easier, but we also have to let people know that their vote does mean something and it counts.
So with all the growing numbers of minorities in Long Beach, would it be safe to say that Long Beach has become a majority minority city? Is that safe to say?
Well, the numbers
West
indicate
of Redondo.
West of Redondo?
As I said, if you look at it, on the
Yeah.
east side, the majority is white.
Okay.
On the west side, north and that, the majority is minority. And I'm just using Redondo as the
Sure.
cutoff point, but
So Long Beach is several cities. You know, it's two cities. It's one, East Long Beach, and then it's non-East Long Beach. But one also has to consider that Virginia Country Club in that area, when you factor it socioeconomic wise, it acts just like East Long Beach. So we can't really get caught up in the numbers game, because just because there's a percentage share, a larger percentage share of Latinos who are in the population, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a Latinization of Long Beach, because the decision-making power still rests with the same people, irrespective of what those demographics do. So, as Juan says, what we have to do is make some way for civic engagement to be much more broadly spread so that people are able to contribute to the city without going through the established elected machine. Maybe we should have community engagement much more than civic engagement, because so many more resources and problems lie in our communities and not in our elected leadership.
and on the education side, the research on cities that have really have made some net drives turning education around. The focus has been on the local, very community level, not the large level. You know, the most important variable in students' education obtainment is the parents. The second is the community they live in. The third is their peer group. And the fourth is the school. And so we need focusing just on the school district is not going to solve the problem.
And at
And
the end of the day,
Just for a closing
Sure.
remark, one more, please.
the numbers don't tell the whole story. The numbers are important, but they don't tell the whole story. Anyone that's driven around Long Beach knows. You drive to the west side, you're going to see a different Long Beach. You drive to North Long Beach, you're going to see a different Long Beach. What's important, I think, to focus on is there is no policy agenda that reflects community's best interest, whether that be the Cambodian population, Latino population, African American population. So we need to focus on developing policy agendas that reflect what's in the best interest of the community.
Okay, well, News Long Beach really wants to thank you for taking the time to speak with us. I'm sure we'll be hearing much more about these subjects in future shows. We now want to take a moment to hear from one of our future leaders, Felicia Cade, from the Homeland Cultural Center.
Agape. My goal is not to mold, shape, or change you, but to love you for exactly who and where you are, shed tears with you for every scar life has left on you, lend a hand or two. If ever life seems too difficult, encourage you to see the truth that rests inside of you. We are family, yes, me and you. Makes no difference if our colors are different, cause love is an external, internal, universal language. My God is one of love, peace, compassion, and understanding. I want that love to pass through me so much that it becomes overwhelming, so confident that this flesh would dare to raise against it, that love would filter through every word from my mouth like melodies from an ancient instrument. Disarm any attack of selfish intent, love so strong that it becomes permanent linked. No matter how much tape you use, it won't remove it. My goal is not to mold, shape, or change you, just to love you, because love is the only thing that can break the chains of the unchangeable. Flick light switches in dark rooms, make birds chirp to a different tune, raise the death rate on hate, put food on empty plates. Love is not a cliche or something we just say, but the life we choose to live every day.